GM fam, today is Friday, April 4th, 2025, the first day of the rest of our lives, and I hope for your sake it's your best one yet. We're going to have a lot of fun because it's almost tax day here in America. So we got someone who might be arguably masquerading as your tax advisor. Is that fair to say, Noah?
I'm more of a legal investigator. Taxes for accounting, and there's two considerations, accounting and law.
And to be clear, you're not a lawyer and you're not an accountant, correct?
Correct. I'm an autodidact, which means I have a capacity to teach myself.
So just getting out of the way that nothing on here is financial advice, of course.
Reasonable.
All right. Well, before we get started, we're going to quickly plug the winner of last week's QR code, which was not, in fact, Curve Finance, but just a Curve fan. Curve doesn't pay for marketing, but a fan was willing to spend some squid out of their own pocket. So take a look and click that QR code to see some of the cool stuff that's been going on with Curve Llama Land redesign. And if you're interested in this QR code, the auction for obtaining this QR code is going to be happening and possibly even expiring while we're on stream here. So head over to leviathannews.xyz. We will be checking out updates as that rolls in, but it looks like it could be sometimes you get some fierce bidding. About half an hour from now, this one might expire for a bargain, less than $20 for an amazing QR code. All right, with that out of the way, we would like to bring it to you, Mr. Do you go by Mr., Sir, Captain? How was the proper title?
I enjoy the captain.
All right, Captain.
My name Noah's fine.
All right.
But good morning. Um, Taxes are quite a contentious topic. Obviously, that's a great starter. What does that
Yes,
mean
yes.
for a person like me? That means over the last years, I've done things, managed investments, considered accounting. But over the last 3 years in particular, I started to question what's the relationship with accounting and law. So, trying to keep things simple was the premise of anything that I'm trying to say right now. So, primarily, accountants are not lawyers, and accountants are trained based on IRS rules. Now, Treasury has the Code of Federal Regulations, which is the much touted 50 bajillion word set of documents that they publish, which is basically the interpretation of IRC code. Now, accountants additionally follow IRS memorandums, chief legal counsel memorandums, which is all interpretation, which is all reasonable because everyone is capable, or at least persons that want to are capable of interpreting the law as written by Congress. So some years ago, that dawned on me. Ah, all right. What are the words? What are the laws? And it's very simple. Like you just Google IRC, whatever you want. I mean, really, the basis of what's most interesting is like 61 gross income, or 7701 is applicable specifically in the context of what we're discussing today. So there's a lot of definitions in the law, but the point is words matter. Semantics matter, the definition of words. Like this page right here is just one page of so many in IRC code, which is published by Congress. And that is such a powerful thing. So many folks will glance over it and be like, what does it mean? And I'm the type of guy that's like, all right, fine. What does it mean? What is the choice of the word? And that's intent. Definitions are very clear, very unambiguous, and very substantive when used as justification or argument, in argument. So, to top it all off, not only do we have the IRC code written by Congress, we have common law. And common law is basically look up Justia, and that's just one of the websites. There's countless sources of case precedent. Now, these precedents are stronger or strongest when they come from the Supreme Court, but they're also meaningful when they come from inferior courts. But when you draw on case precedents from the Supreme Court, that's by definition the law of the land. That's common law. That's what has been judged and ruled historically as what is reasonable. And reasonableness is a core of everything that we understand about just our way of life, and especially how courts interpret law. Now, here's the takeaway, and then I'll let you set up how you want to take this. Um, I am much more moved by the IRC, the words as written by Congress, and the interpretation of precedents, judges' interpretations of the law, than that of an agency. The IRS is an agency, and by functional definition, it's a collections agency, which is fine. That's not a derogatory statement. It's an acknowledgement of reality. And they have a capacity to look at the exact same laws that I do and the exact same court precedents that I do. And they are absolutely in their right to interpret things in their favor. But equally, I am absolutely in my right to interpret things in my favor. And by definition, that is exactly what the judiciary branch of the United States government is for, to take different interpretations and produce rulings, judgments, to create new precedents.
Right, and I feel like we got the oh shoot, didn't come in just in time for that moving finale, but we got the American flag background rocking here because you're getting back to constitutional principles. So we're gonna have a constitutional convention here via live stream. So like before we get started, I just want to like nail a few of the specifics. So just to be clear, like this is just a discussion in the Curve governance channel. I haven't yet seen a formal vote for this. And in fact, if there were to be a vote, there would be no code change anyway. So it
No,
doesn't.
no, not at all.
Okay, so we're still very much still in the discussion phase. So no one's late to the discussion. Although we probably want to get it wrapped up more or less by tax day. Because my thinking is, correct me if I'm wrong about this, because you're the autodidact here. I could actually potentially just print off a copy of this nominee agreement and include it in my taxes as justification for whatever, basically say, here's my interpretation, here's the precedent. And then the way that the law works is that the IRS is a civil agency. So if it disagreed with my interpretation, it would have to take me to court to prove it. But because I had actually included my documentation, like I would very clearly be in that category of tax avoidance as opposed to tax fraud. Tax fraud being a crime, tax avoidance being a patriotic duty. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. So Form 8275 and subversions of 8275 is for disclosing a tax position, which basically means I read the law, this is what I understand. So you can include statements, but I found it interesting to reference external links, and it turns out just throw like a bitly of a Google Doc, and that provides very easy access to a document instead of trying to like finagle how to incorporate 40 pages into Form 8275. We're in 2025, so explain in a couple of sentences because yada, 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 refer to this document. And the more documents you have, the more argument and interpretation you have, the more substantial your argument is, the more reasonable it is, and that's okay. So it's not just court. They don't just take you to court. This is about a conversation. Just exactly the same thing that I wanted to have on the Curve Governance Forum. This is my interpretation. I am presenting to you my returns. Feel welcome to ask questions. Feel welcome to pass it by legal counsel. Let's talk and identify what is reasonable, what is the most reasonable way to proceed.
All right. Now, okay, let's now unpack some of the like nitty gritty of the proposal here. So specifically, what you're trying to do is my interpretation of this, because one of the I'm sure you are aware of this as a person who is very smart and capable of generating long form content. Is when you post long form content, like 99% of people go, "Oh, that's nice," and then about 1% bookmark it and say, "Okay, I'll read this later." Um, and that's fine because that's the smart 1%. But even of that 1%, maybe 1% actually does take the time to go and read it later. But I'm that 1%. Like I have printed this out. I have made some notes. But I'm not smart enough to pretend to know what's going on. So here's my interpretation of this. You are taking the fee distributor contract and essentially within this presenting your reasoning that this fee distributor contract is this legal title which officially classifies as a nominee. Is that correct?
So broadly, that is a reasonable statement.
Okay.
It,
And
it
a
is a,
nominee, could you explain what
so
you mean by
nominee.
nominee?
So a nominee, we go to 1988 in the Bollinger case, which basically establishes three criteria um, that is required of a nominee. So a nominee does not hold title. It holds title for not like a beneficiary, if you want to compare it to another structure, other structures, but it holds property or money for someone else. So technically, it never holds anything. There's no titles in crypto. So the concept is it already has nominee interest because of the inherent nature of smart contracts. And I go through a lot of documentation that says like a smart contract is an independent entity that has a formal charter of or articles of formation, and that by definition is the code of the contract. So I interpret DeFi the way folks have not granularly deconstructed DeFi. These are discrete entities. And traditionally, maybe you could think of them as like independent corporations or sole proprietorships, but they have literally an articles of formation. There is nothing inherent, and this is a great argument, there is nothing inherent to a blockchain that couples contracts together. If anything, they're at worst case subsidiaries interacting with one another, but they're not related whatsoever. They're just completely decoupled, this androgynous type of entity unto itself.
Right. Now, okay, so one of the interesting things I've noticed lately is that, of course, the regulation, the whole regulatory environment has been moving in favor of crypto in a lot of ways, right? Like you've seen all these enforcement actions being tossed out. But one that notably doesn't seem to have been tossed out is the entirety of the Tornado Cash case, right? And the reason I bring this up is because there was a lot of concern when essentially a smart contract address got added to, and I'm not a lawyer, of course, so I might be getting the exact term wrong, but it's like the smart contract address itself was subject to sanctions, which was arguably also like a novel legal interpretation of a smart contract, similar to how you're doing it. And it seems like they're still proceeding in some form with the case against Roman Storm, which leads me to believe that they might actually want to try and establish or push this precedent that a smart contract is, maybe not to try and expand the um classification of what could be applied to a smart contract. But if so, would that go in violation of the way that you're trying to interpret a smart contract here?
As of currently, no. They have to define it. And the only place for it to be defined is by Congress. And with regard to tax treatment, that goes in IRC code. Just like we looked at what 7708 as a definitions page, they could define it. And as of current, the definition of a partnership, 7701, is applicable. It's pretty obvious. A2, I can't read it, it's a little blurry, but basically a syndicate, group, or pool. It's kind of unambiguously applicable. So, which is fascinating because this is Congress. This has nothing to do with the IRS. So, by definition, by Congress, so many folks in crypto are engaged in partnerships. Now, that's a separate conversation, tax treatment or collections from an IRS perspective. And that would lead into a separate conversation. But from a congressional standpoint, folks are engaging in partnership activity.
Mm. Right, which is, I think you could probably even like get constitutional because we got our constitution background and point out that like assemblage is freedom of assemblage is right there in the First Amendment. So you actually have a pretty strong constitutional case. So this brings us to this larger document, which is the voter escrow partnership. And this is almost more like a manifesto, perhaps than anything else. But this one's meaty. This is a lot going on in there. But essentially, like, it's the presentation of everything you've talked about so far. Is that like fair to say? Like the basis and justification for what this concept of like this fee, why you can establish this fee distributor contract as a nominee.
Yes. And that is, so there's three steps or three core things that the memorandum is intent to prove, more towards the top of the document. So the nominees, the third of the, it's kind of like the conclusion of, all right, let's establish what the hell is going on here. There's the structure and the relationship of partners versus a partnership, and let's prove, well, let's read it. Prove that the voter escrow partnership achieves the qualifications of a partnership independent of formal compliance with IRS reporting expectations, which we literally just did. IRS 7701, according to Congress, this is a partnership. That is has nothing to do with tax reporting obligations. It's just a definition. So a good part of the memorandum proves that. Prove there's no partnership dominion over property or money. Um, and dominion is Glenshaw Glass, which is basically the foundation of tax compliance by the IRS, gross income. And dominion is the key word, and clearly realized is quote unquote one of the most important phrases in that case. And we granularly deconstruct what the heck's going on in DeFi with regard to dominion. And that's a powerful thing because people see these claim buttons and they see property flowing back and forth between contracts. But what is dominion and how is that foundational component of tax law applied to what the hell's going on here? So that's point number two. And we can break this all down and go through the document and whatnot. But point number three is where the nominee interest comes in. We want to prove that escrow distributions from basically, in curve terms, the fee distributor contract to partners, which is basically press claim, no matter how acquired, property in the fee distributor contract, because the IRS clearly states that all virtual currency, they use the term virtual currency, all crypto is property. And barring a definition page 7701 by Congress, that is the status quo. This is property. So there's considerations if it was money, but in either case, it's not money. So no matter how the fee distributor contract acquires property, with its inherent nominee interest characteristics, um, the treatment of that property is governed by Commissioner versus Bollinger in 1988. That's exactly what the case discusses.
Okay. So then, so much of this focuses on dominion, and just to be clear, as a U.S. taxpayer who like voluntarily pays his taxes every year, and full compliance with the law, which is see, patriotic, we got that. And if you're just joining now, none of us are offering financial or tax advice. We're just interested in the subject because we're about to get blasted in about 11 days on taxes. The dominion refers to essentially when you have provable control over the crypto, and thus in like the net effect of this is if your manifesto is adopted, this means that when I claim rewards, that's when I assume a tax burden. Is that correct?
You skip step 2 to go to step 3.
Okay, I know, but I gotta file my taxes. The deadline's looming.
Well, first we have to prove a couple of things. It's pretty easy to prove it's a partnership. That's just by definition. So the vote does nothing. It doesn't declare it's a partnership and declare that, all right, we're going to comply with IRS rules regarding partnership filing requirements. What we're stating, or what the memorandum states, is it is reasonable that partnership laws as written by Congress are applicable to what is going on here with these parties involved in a syndicate or a group. Now, if partnership laws are applicable, and this is really where the memorandum started in my mind, I'm like, oh shit, so what are the laws? Now, a partnership is not taxed, it is a pass through entity. So partners are individually taxed based on distributions from the partnership, basically their pro rata share or whatever the agreement is. And in the instance of Curve, it's based on relative governance power. So that's what the partnership distribution is. Now, here's the kicker. What is the income of the partnership? What is the dominion of the partnership? Clearly, nothing's realized because there's no money involved to a degree. So that's like Eisner v. Macomber and that type of conversation. But the dominion is what's critical from an IRC 61 standpoint. The partnership, these group of partners that deposit CRV into VCRV, have technologically verifiable no dominion over any of the property in any of the contracts, nor the escrow contract. Clearly, these are peer to peer interactions where it is technologically provable that a third party is engaging with another third party, or basically an NPC, a non playable character, a contract. So there's no person involved, there's no entity to represent the partnership, there's no product or service offered by the partnership because there's no products, meaning you're not acquiring natural resources and doing manufacturing and selling a product and doing accounts receivables. So that doesn't exist. So is it a service? That's an interesting conversation. But then we come back to these discrete entities, the nature of a smart contract, and the concept that the code of the contract is probably reasonable to be argued to be articles of inception as a discrete entity because nothing ties contracts together from a blockchain technological standpoint. So, refocusing, um, does the partnership produce income if there's no product or service? Considering that breakdown of everything I just said. So, if there's no income to the partnership and partnerships are passed through, there's no income to partners. That does not invalidate what we prove in the first step, that it is a partnership. What we're now doing is proving that the partnership does not produce any income from any products or services offered by the partnership. So that brings in like IRC 701, 702, and 703. Um, so there's no taxable income, but there's still distributions. So we want to talk about the fee distributor contract, which has inherent nominee interest. And I mean, technically, 731 can be talked about, IRC 731, but the fee distributor contract is not really a distribution of property owned by the partnership or contributed by partners to the partnership. And that's what 731 would be discussing. So in the memorandum, I break all this down. 731 is not applicable also because it has nominee interest, or we're arguing and frankly proving that the fee distributor contract inherently has nominee interest. It doesn't report to anybody. It's an independent entity that follows its rules no matter what anyone else wants. It has immutable code. It may read information from outside of its entity, but nothing outside of it can affect it or invade it or take dominion of the property contained within it. None of the partners can say, all right, let's do a vote and take some of that money and do something discretionally. So there's no capacity to invade and take dominion. So that sets up basically the conversation for proving that that, that leads into the conversation of how distributions are made from a escrow that has nominee interest.
Okay, so there's definitely a lot going on there, and I want to, just take a second to recognize the question from the chat because we're live streaming. So while the 600 of you who are watching this are listening, you can pop your questions onto X or YouTube, and we'll go ahead and answer them for you. So it's a great time to it would be a great time to ping us with questions. Arrow is asking, two questions. One, where would one start when it comes to basically trying to understand this material, and two would be where would one start when relaying this to our tax guy to implement for this past year?
So two considerations, there's law and accounting. All right, so every accountant is rightfully worried about liability. So this is a novel interpretation, and they're like, okay, this is a partnership that's not filing a 1065 and issuing K1s. All right, what the hell do I do with it? And unfortunately, I've seen accountants that say that breaks the IRS system. All right, what does that have to do with me? We're talking about Congress. The IRS is just an agency, and they are responsible for executing the law as written by Congress. So what's really needed is an accountant eh, that has either an independent autodidact in them that wants to understand the law as written by Congress and execute accordingly, which is probably going to be far, far, far and few between. There's not going to be many of them. But from a law perspective, I think any lawyer should be interested in this kind of document. This is a very granular breakdown of the law as written. With full semantic evaluation, the definition of words are all considered. This is an extremely granular document. Um, I don't have recommendations for how people should or could or may want to proceed. Obviously, from my perspective, I understand this document. Therefore, I have a capacity to represent or express what the hell's going on. So, just like we're having with this conversation. Um, so, in some regards, from a legal perspective, all right, you guys want to talk about this? You want me? Hey, IRS, let's have a legal conversation or in a court. I'm not familiar with the quorum. I probably rightfully uh, uh, outsource that responsibility to a third party attorney, but I surely have a capacity to explain this document's content and what it means and the implications of it. I can't in good faith offer any recommendations for anyone. Everyone has to proceed on their what serves their best interest.
How
But
about
for
this?
myself, yeah,
If we submit this with our taxes and we get audited, will you commit to doing a live stream with the auditors, prosecutors that come after us, to have the debate on a podcast like this?
well, I could talk on behalf of this memorandum. I know what you're saying is tongue in cheek. I just this is not something that could help everyone. What this document is a legal analysis that's pretty robust that cites precedents that go back to the early 1900s and draws on established law from Congress to draw conclusions and interpret the law as written. That's
Right.
what it is.
All right. Another good question coming in the chat, and this is pretty relevant. Since the entire rest of the world has basically been walled off from America thanks to tariffs, does this matter to any of our listeners outside the United States?
Yes, this document is an expression that everyone in every country has their individual capacity to look up the laws as written by their respective government and understand them and apply them and interpret them. That's really what it means for outside the US. And that's what I would like to do. As you brought up the First Amendment, people have their individual rights under the Constitution of the United States to express themselves and speak freely and produce argument and interpret laws. And I guess, a good takeaway from a lot of the conversation is a lot of behavior is based on fear. Not really one to be afraid of a conversation, especially after doing research and exercising due diligence, because then you have your tools. You have an understanding about what the hell you're talking about.
Well, I think the fear comes in the fact that if the IRS is having a conversation with you, it could end up in court, and the U.S. government does pretty good at winning their court cases in federal court.
Well, that's a fear. What's pertinent is whether it's in court. You don't end up in court right away. First off, you're having a conversation with inspectors. You're having a conversation with, or the inspectors are dropping off documentation and justification to their attorneys, and they're doing a full legal analysis because, from an IRS perspective, they're doing a cost benefit analysis. How much potential tax revenue we can make versus how much we have to spend on lawyers to actually bring this to court. That's exactly what happened with the Jarrett case, in my opinion. That's just implicit, not explicit. So you remember Jared and Tezos, and he got a tax refund for his staking.
Oh,
So,
okay. I thought you were talking
so
about Jared from Subway, and I was like,
oh
that's
no,
a
no,
completely different legal case.
this was last year. Jared was staking Tezos, and he paid taxes on it, and then he filed for a tax refund, and the IRS issued him a refund. So he received Tezos from staking that wasn't taxed. Now, obviously, it's all implicit. There was no judgment in the case because the IRS refunded the money. One of two things really happened. The IRS said, I don't want to make precedent because this is a contentious topic. We're dealing with property, we're dealing with staking, but this isn't like chopping down wood in a forest. This is digital. So they didn't want to make precedent. That's one potential takeaway. Or the other one was they were dealing with a $4,000 tax refund. And they're like, this is going to take us 200 grand to try this case, cost benefit analysis, give them the refund. In any case, that should express a decent reality. It's not so simple as how people think. There's the cost benefit analysis consideration that they certainly make, and there's the precedent consideration they certainly make. And in consideration of the precedent angle, it's exactly why I wrote this document. They there's some serious precedent that's applicable to DeFi. Based on my knowledge, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen someone look at the IRC code, find relevant court cases relative to DeFi, and do a thorough, robust, granular interpretation of what the hell is going on.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Now, just the funny thing about the tax code is it's so complicated that if the want to build that case, like they can mine through thousands of pages of tax code, and I'm sure construct an equally elegant like counter case. So you did address that in the document. You do address some like your thoughts as to like how people might counter this. But first, I just like because I haven't followed as close, maybe you can help me. Is this the most recent guidance the IRS has issued? This was from April 2024. And in it, they mention specifically this clause that I wanted to ask you about. And this is just for when you're supposed to just check yes as to like, did I receive payment or proper or like did I hold crypto during the year? But they specifically, let me zoom in a bit here. They specifically mentioned that you received new digital assets resulting from mining, staking, or similar activities, which I think is similar to that Jared case you're mentioning. And this should mean like receiving income from the fee distributor, right? Like this is what they're talking about
Oh
here.
yeah. So in law, you have to be very specific. When to check yes, check yes, period. That's it. There's no scope, there's no other consideration involved. You are correct. But there you can't draw anything else from it. So a distribution from the fee distributor contract aligns with that particular bullet. Therefore, check yes. Nope, muted.
And that's the only guidance they've issued on this subject. Is there
Oh, there's
other
more.
things that there's more? Okay.
Oh yeah. I have in my other documents. This is a relatively short document.
Yeah,
This
this one I
document is
understood. And I
well, no,
click
this
yes. I
not
click
yeah,
yes, so I
definitely
think I
click
got this
yes.
answer right. I think I got this answer right.
Oh yeah, but I was referring to the memorandum. That
Mhm.
39-page memorandum is relatively short compared to other stuff I've
Oh,
written.
yes. Oh,
Yeah,
I
so
believe it. I believe it.
I've
All right,
done. Uh, yeah.
let's get back into your memorandum here, specifically. So you frequently throughout this memorandum, you mentioned the Loper Bright decision. And I'm curious about this because my understanding is that the elimination of Chevron deference might affect that.
Ah, okay. It's the so part of why I started doing this years ago. When I heard of the Loper Bright case, I was like, "Oh my God, this is exactly why I started doing what I started doing." And when I heard of Loper Bright, I was like, "Wow!" So interpretation. We're talking about literally all the IRS memorandums, including the document you were just looking at, including every document that the Trump administration basically told the IRS to, all right, let's stop and redo it. Um, it's all interpretation. So, for instance, my memorandum is from a court perspective, a judicial perspective, not from an accounting perspective nor the IRS perspective, which means in a court setting, the IRS could argue, yeah, but we've done this, or this is the history of the way people have reported, or X, Y, and Z. And from a defense perspective, you're like, all right, per Loper Bright, reference statute, reference the IRC code. Where are you acquiring this authority to do this? And that elimination of agency deference means the court has to ground itself in the law as written. And that's called de novo, the law, the words of the law as written, which basically puts us all on the same footing. And that's remarkable from like an autodidact's perspective. Like, all right, they're looking at words. I'm looking at words. We're the same. And what do? We construct sentences, we construct arguments, we draw on the laws as written, and we draw on case precedents called common law. And we build strength to argument.
Okay. And then let's get to the reaction from the community here. So, you give the good TLDR, the steps that you would be like mandated by this, and mostly like you got like a comment from one good dude thinks it's good. Llama Risk, to their credit, like they are like super good with legal stuff, and they've written a bunch of like really in-depth legal documents. They had some questions about this, and you did reply to them. So you could, of course, direct people to your reply here. But like the basic like questions they have is like, first of all, how do you envisage formalizing the agreement in a manner that ensures it's both validly executed and legally enforceable? They also wanted an explanation about how the escrow arrangement is being treated as a partnership for U.S. tax purposes. You already addressed that in pretty substantial detail. But basically, yeah, Llama Risk raised a bunch of questions, and you answered them in text. But why don't you also go ahead and like summarize that response for people who are listening here?
So the fee distributor contract, the escrow contract that distributes what is quote unquote fees, there's an interesting section in the memorandum discussing that. um, inherently possesses the characteristics of nominee interest, or that it was inherently assigned or inherently has nominee interest. It is a discrete entity, unable to be affected by any third party. It's unable to be affected by the partnership. It cannot be invaded. It does not, there's no potential for anyone to claim dominion over the property contained within, other than as defined by the articles of inception, the contract's code, and that is tamper proof. So the well, let's go back. Let me ground my thought process in the first
I didn't.
part of the Lombardist.
Oh yeah, let me get that back up there. I don't know if you could see that well
Oh,
enough on screen. Let me
formalization.
zoom in.
Yeah. So how do you? So technically, this is why did I propose this? Because I wanted other folks to be constructive. I wanted folks to talk about this. There is absolutely no need whatsoever for this governance vote to pass, in my opinion, based on my reading of the laws as written. It inherently possesses nominee interest. But for instance, if there's a governance vote which has it's a signed vote, that is a point of reference. It doesn't add to the strength of argument or any argument that's presented in the memorandum. It's just in addition to, basically stating that, all right, everyone's like, we read this, this is quite interesting, and we agree or we understand that this memorandum describes the fee distributor contract has characteristics of nominee interest. So it's an acknowledgement vote. It doesn't signify anything other than a memorialization, maybe. Um, so that's how it's already enforced. So in the meat space, you would need partners to all agree, and then they would need to create a third party entity, incorporation, or whatever, however they want to structure it. And they would need all this documentation for enforcement and compliance and how to prove that it has nominee interest. But that is literally what the contract's code of the fee distributor contract does and prove. It's already there.
Got it. Okay. Good answer. Good answer. Let's get to the counter argument section, in which you tried to steelman the opponent's case against the voter escrow partnership. Just because I think it's it adds to the credibility of the document to actually like to try and formalize the case against it and argue against it. Shows that you have been thinking through things. Um, so why
Not
don't you walk?
simple.
Go ahead.
These are nice counter arguments and rebuttals. I attack this from many angles, and I think there's four counter arguments and rebuttals that are literally like 15 pages in length, more or less. So,
Yeah.
well, how do you attack it? Okay, Iris is like, it's not a partnership. All right, look up IRC 7701. That's in brief, but there's obviously, from a documentation standpoint, a whole entire argument that could be presented, and thus the rebuttals to the counter arguments. Now, then they could also argue, like, all right, it's a partnership, so why aren't you filing a 1065? Well, because it's software, but we prove that it's a partnership, so we have no capacity to file a 1065. And then the framing of that standpoint is, all right, what are we supposed to do? And that's from like um, a consumer of the IRS's perspective. Hey, IRS, this is a partnership. You want a 1065 that can't be filed. What's the answer? What do you do? It's not, and that's what Loper Bright discusses. It's not for them to define what to do. It's for Congress to define what to do. It's not the mandate of IRS to write the law. It's the mandate of Congress to write the law. And I find that an interesting angle. They may, so the part of the last counter argument is they may want you to pay taxes, but that's not something. for them to decide. That's for Congress to decide. And all their job is to interpret the words and the law as written de novo by Congress. Their want is not part of the equation. And frankly, since Loper Bright, their interpretation is not up to them. Their interpretation is up to a judge, or the interpretation is up to a judge.
Now, a potential other counter argument that I don't think you addressed in here is that you still are saying that, like, when you receive the rewards, that is what counts as, like, when I as a taxpayer get dominion over the funds and thus would assume a tax burden. But a counter argument might be like, if I really hate paying taxes, I would prefer to have a interpretation of this where even when I claim the rewards, I don't get dominion of it. And thus, like, you're giving me more of a tax burden than if I had a more creative legal argument that would say, like, maybe I don't get custody of the funds until they're in a centralized exchange. But there's anything in blockchain land is not, it's kind of like, metaverse, it's not real.
This is the whole point of nominee interest. And this is why the Bollinger case is so exciting. And this is why it's so hard to understand the goddamn Code of Federal Regulations and how Treasury interprets the word of Congress. The Bollinger case has a very simple outcome and a very simple constraint: basis. Property enters an escrow contract with nominee interest, and all of that is set up in the memorandum. What is the basis? And there is a counter argument and there's also sections that discuss what is the basis. So the basis in the Bollinger case is preserved between escrow and the partner. So we've already identified and clarified why partnership does not produce income, because there's absolutely no capacity for the partnership to exercise dominion. These are third-party peer-to-peer interactions that result in the escrow of property. In DeFi, they use, so here, there's a good section at the end of the escrow contract section. Where is it? Here, escrow contract. Though this escrowed property might superficially resemble fees, it is not a fee generated by the partnership, because it's so simple. What is a fee? A fee is a manifestation of a product or a service. It's a payment. So it can't be a fee because the partnership is incapable of offering a product or a service. So basically, you have what results is the escrowing of property that's a manifestation of third party persons engaging peer to peer with one another, which isn't a fee of the partnership. People are doing stuff with each other in discrete immutable entities that have their own articles of inception unto themselves. So this really brings up the nature of what the hell is going on here. It's what no one has done before. So it's not a fee. So what? It's the escrowing of property by two people. We have no idea who they are, and they're doing some shit, and property gets escrowed by the rules of the contracts that they're engaging with, that the partnership has no dominion over. So the basis of the property that enters those contracts is arguably the fair market value at the time of contribution. Now that presents a complexity because we have no way to track that as partners. We don't know when. I mean, obviously, if there was DeFi tools created, we could track fair market value on escrow contract deposit. So I think technically it's possible, but I have an entire counter argument and an entire section that discusses that. But so generally speaking, I cite case precedents that discusses why and how it is most reasonable that the fair market value upon distribution from the escrow contract is basically all you're going to get about basis. It's the only way to track a factual, actual value with accuracy.
Okay, so
So it's
basically, to summarize then, like, because this the properties of how the smart contract operates, there's no basis and thus no capital gains tax triggered even when you're claiming rewards from the fee distributor. Is that fair?
the base. If $1,000 of Bitcoin is escrowed, the basis is $1,000 fair market value upon contribution. So let's say there's zero volatility and the escrow contract distributes $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, the basis carries over. The partner receives $1,000 in Bitcoin at $1,000 of basis. That's not that, and that is what I kind of jumped to conclusion with, or jumped the. That's why I was trying to focus on nominee interest rules with the proposal, because that's the craziest takeaway that I could possibly have based on the Bollinger case. Basis preservation involves a distribution from an escrow contract with nominee interest preserving basis. So there's IRC 1001. If you receive $1,000 worth of Bitcoin at a basis of $1,000, all right, fine. It goes up to $2,000. You owe capital gains tax on the delta, $1,000. But that's after the fact. What happens if you take that $1,000 in Bitcoin from a claim button and you immediately convert it to stablecoins? There's no change in basis. You received $1,000 worth of Bitcoin at $1,000 basis. You convert it to $995 worth of stablecoins. So technically, it's a $5 capital loss. There's no capital gains on receiving that property. And then we could talk about like constructive receipts. So there's an entire section about constructive receipts and how that's clarified. It's not income to the partner because they're following partnership law. The income allocated to the partner is a manifestation of the income that the partnership generates. And we have proven that the partnership cannot generate income. So if the partner is receiving $1,000 in Bitcoin that has a basis of $1,000, there's no capital gains, and there's no income attributable to the partner because the partnership is technologically provable and capable of realizing Glenchar glass and taking dominion over fees or producing any fees, and there's no income either. So basically, that is the takeaway of the framing or the net result of the memorandum. That claim button isn't what people think it is. And there's 40 pages that break down what no one has looked into.
Okay. And just so there's some people joining just now, like the TLDR of all this is that if you like want to like advance this interpretation, that essentially when you hit the claim button, it's not quite as, it's not quite as cut and dry as, there's many possible interpretations. What has proceeded for the past 50 minutes or so is very detailed explanation of the basis of this like argument. So again, we're not lawyers, we're not accountants, but you could present this to your lawyers, to your accountants, and for example, like try and cobble together a case for how you could do your taxes.
That's part of the conclusion. I mean, this is really just an exercise. I get excited because, you know, this is for me, it's a learning experience. I'm like, holy shit, this is what it says. This is how it works. This is the law. It's provable, and really at the end, after writing this entire document, you come back to the three things you want to prove, and maybe at the end of our conversation, we say we have proven that it's a partnership pretty damn clearly, and that has nothing to do with a declaration of a partnership at all. There's nothing to do with filing 1065s or issuing K1s at all, according to Congress. and there's no capacity to offer a product or service, therefore there's no capacity for the partnership to generate income. And we have proven that escrow distributions, no matter how acquired, which is a very key takeaway from the Bollinger case, the Bollinger case never, ever, ever talks about how property got into the nominee interest account. They only discuss the relationship between the nominee interest account and the recipient. And the whole case concludes based on, or concludes, preservation of basis. So it doesn't matter who put property into the escrow account. So we proved the three things. You press claim, you receive property, it retained basis. What else is there to argue?
Very cool. Now, the other like argument that some people have advanced is that the IRS is itself going to be in disarray because of budget cuts and because of tariffs and everything. So they might not like, who knows if they'll even have time to like deal with anything. Plus, it's like a friendlier administration. So like they might be looking to like at some point even issue counter guidance on this, right?
And they're welcome to. Half of my conclusion is, all right, I'm going to file 8275. I'm happy to talk about this. I'm more than happy for Congress to write some laws, and then you adapt, you adjust, you read the law as written, and you're like, all right, great. If you have to change something, you change something. So instead of approaching this type of topic with fear, I'm more like, let's have a conversation. What is actually going on? And that's always, I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. They're like, all right, nobody's looking into this. Who's looking into this? Where are the accountants that are on my side? Where are the lawyers that are on my side? And I couldn't find anyone. I guarantee, even if I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, they wouldn't be able to see what I saw when reading these words to construct a memorandum like this. So we come back to the old parable: if you want something done right, do it yourself.
Yeah, very, very, very good point. I tried to get our legal squid Alex on the show to discuss, and maybe we'll be able to get him back in the week or two or something like that. He's on vacation, so he wasn't ducking out of like fear of not having like a good case or whatever. But I would be curious to know like if you have like shopped this around, because I'm not a lawyer, right? Like, have you shopped it around to lawyers? Have you shopped it around to accountants? What do they say?
I've tried to. I have an accountant, and he's like, "Holy crap! I can't believe what you do with your documents." My accountant's jaw is constantly on the floor. I have 120 pages worth of documents for different things, and he's like, "I don't know what's going on in your brain." But
Are you
like
paying
this.
him per hour?
Oh, he's expensive. Yeah,
He must be
I don't
happy
know.
when he gets one of these. Like, all right, I'll read through this, but it's gonna cost it's gonna cost $1 or like whatever, like an hour per page.
I don't know. I've spent like 30, 40,000 on lawyers and accountants probably in the last 2 years. Anyway, here's an interesting statement. So I presented this argument in memorandum form, totaling about 40 pages. That does not warrant a knee-jerk reaction saying, I don't like this. I don't agree with this. I don't uh, understand it. This warrants, okay, you're saying this. What about this IRC code? What about this clause? What about this language? What about this court case? That's the only reasonable way to respond to this document. And it is certainly not the case, oh, it breaks what the IRS does. No, this has nothing to do with what the IRS does. This is a document that is for a court using court precedents and the words of the law as written by Congress. So accountants are very quick to say, I don't know what to do, or I can't file this because they have a liability. They have risk. They have their own risk. They don't want to take responsibility for someone doing this because then someone who's not prepared to defend themselves is like, all right, you got me into trouble. So they can't they can't proceed with something like this. So that's why it comes back to what Era said. There's no practical way for me to say anything about what to do with accountants. It's an individual relationship between you and another person. And nobody wants to take responsibility for someone else. So the only reason I'm have written a document like this is because I take responsibility for myself. I do what others don't. And I learn, and I have no inhibition, in some regard, no fear. I mean, obviously at some point I'll have fear, all humans do, but I certainly don't fear words, and I don't fear a conversation using words.
All right. As for other people who gave feedback, so first of all, like almost half the people out there said they read it, which is pretty good. So, like maybe they're lying because, like, I know my teacher often asked if I read the book, and I'd said, "Oh, of course, I read the book." Um, then the feedback though on Twitter or X now was like rather like I guess tepid, let's say. So like you got accused of being an AI, which might be a good accusation. Like it means you think like an AI. Martin said that he wasn't sure why it's needed. He just tells his government, "I got this amount of Curve USD as dividend," and they're okay with that. No, I think he's not US. I think he's Switzerland, so it's different. LexNode hasn't read it. Hopefully, we can get LexNode to read it. That'd be really cool and have him on the show to discuss. But what was your response in you wrote it out, but like go ahead and verbally like respond to some of the feedback here.
Fiddy said it was AI, but I just had a conversation, an hour-long conversation about it. So that brings up philosophical questions. What is
Well,
language? What is, yeah.
what I think is needed is I think we need to take your writing and feed it into and train an LLM based on you, because I think you would be a great candidate to have your own AI built. It would be way better than 99% of the AI agents out there.
It would be completely uh, deficient of me to not utilize AI for what it is capable of. But clearly, in my capacity to articulate in the way I speak, these words in this document are a manifestation of everything that I am, whether explicitly each individual word is written by me or an argument is presented as constructed from an LLM, and then I modify the language to express myself, or I modify and correct it to best express the argument. These are all my
Well,
words.
Well, LLMs are good, but have
Oh no,
working a
yeah,
lot with the LLMs, like it could not come up with something like this. Like this is
no,
clearly like there's a stage of creative reasoning that LLMs do not yet possess. So reading through it is pretty clear to me that this is not the byproduct of an LLM. Although of course, yeah, I'm sure you're able to supplement some sections, and probably I would guess you used it for the counter arguments section.
no. I use LLM significantly, but there is so the first days. So this is obviously 2 weeks in the making, but I have years that I've been writing legal documents, and I'm quite proud of where this document is. The flow of the sections, how you introduce so like for instance, the first section talking about traditional partnerships that didn't exist, and I'm like, all right, so I have this flow of sections, and now I should add more content, introduce context, and I add additional sections. So this is a constructive process where this is certainly not the original form of the document. And it's certainly not the original progression of sections. And there's no answer to how to build documents in their perfect form when you start. It's an iteration process, just like with software. But the flow of these sections are quite interesting because it builds from context into what is blockchain. And frankly, I start with the three things I want to prove. And the only way I didn't know those three things at the beginning. I've only realized those three things probably in the last couple of days after writing the entire document. But that belongs in a section very early in this document. You go through what a smart contract is, you go through downstream contracts, you go through the relationship between contracts, you go through the notion of an escrow contract, then you introduce inherent nominee interest. Then you go through IRC 701 to 703, 731, and you talk about, all right, great, basis preservation. You bring in the court cases, you bring in the most important, Glenshaw Glass, and over time, these documents, or that my process, the documents iterate and strengthen and are better organized to clearly express the economic reality of what is going on. These are very key words: reasonableness, economic reality. What is property versus what is money is like one of the most important things to discuss when talking about IRC code from Congress. They are not the same. Eisner v. Macomber, you have to realize property for it to become money. Property isn't inherently money, it's property. And this comes back to like constitutional property rights type stuff.
Right. And by the way, we were joined by our co-host Sam. Sam, welcome. You have missed a very interesting hour because I don't know if are you among the 50% or so of people who have read the voter escrow partnership manifesto?
This is my first time glancing through, but it looks really interesting. I'm like tearing it apart at the moment, but I think that just stay off like the top level stuff that I'm looking at, and like it seems that this is something that would like drastically change the understanding of how these VE partnerships work and how they're characterized under the law. Looks pretty cool.
I didn't know where this memorandum was going to head. I had an idea in my mind, and I had no idea that like under corporate law, there's three types of laws that are very important to understand. You got personal law, you got corporate law, and you got trust law. They're completely distinct in many regards. Now, I understand a lot of trust law. I know nothing about corporate law. So a lot of what I understand from trust law is kind of how I started thinking about this from an individual law perspective. And I had no idea how this was going to turn out. Now, interestingly, in Discord, some initial conclusions from other folks in the relevant channels is that it's not going to work. It's not going to produce the conclusion you want. And that was actually before I read the court case, Bollinger case, regarding nominee interest. And then I'm like, fuck is this nominee interest? And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what's going on here. And we could technologically prove that it possesses this property, this legal property inherently. And I was like, all of a sudden, what was a roadblock is no longer blocked. And this is probably about like 2 weeks ago at this point. And that allowed significant progress to be made on the coherence of argument in the document.
Cool. So since Sam hasn't read it, I'll give him a chance to skim through and see if he has any questions. But if you have any kind of final thoughts you want to give on this document, before, if you have time, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on some of the other aspects of the markets, because we live in interesting times, which is a curse.
My God.
Well, I do have a question about it. Like, now that it's written, like, how do you build political support for it? Like, what's the plan to go out and lobby this into reality?
No, that's what's exciting. That you don't need political support. You don't even need the governance vote on Curve to pass. This is an interpretation of what currently exists, independent of any action that anyone else can take. This is reading the words written by Congress in law and interpreting common law, the history of judicial judgments, and describing the economic reality of what is commonly referred to as DeFi. People have been engaging in DeFi and taking the guidance of accountants that are trained to do X, Y, and Z based on X, Y, and Z rules. The accountants haven't read the IRC in entirety. The accountants are not lawyers. And why would a lawyer look into this? I guess my 2 cents is, at minimum, nobody has looked into the law as written. And this document is an expression of that fundamental reality.
That's awesome. I'd love to see if you could build some political support around this. This seems like one of the kind of reactions to like the broker law that they're trying to pass, or some of the other minutia that the IRS has levied against crypto tokens and protocols and partnerships.
Well, the
over
irony
course
is
of
that
years.
this is partnership law, and none of the IRS memorandums talk about partnership law regarding crypto. So this supersedes all IRS memorandums because this is established law. This isn't new interpretations, or rather, frankly, it is a new interpretation, but it's an interpretation of already existing law. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to apply the law to DeFi, not wait for guidance by the IRS, because the IRS surely has issued no guidance regarding partnerships. And clearly, that's something in the back of our minds. We've been engaging in voter escrow and this concept of governance. All right, fine, great. What laws are applicable? And that's somewhat how this type of piece emerged. Oh shit, that's a partnership.
And it's really telling, because I was reading this post by let's see, Paradigm came out and kind of like put out their general perspective on what the market structure for crypto should be coming into 2025. I saw this put out by the VP of Regulatory Affairs, Justin Slaughter, over at Paradigm, and I thought it was really interesting. So maybe I can just bring that up real fast. We can like roll through that, and then you can talk about that in the context of this. Let me just find that as I'm scrolling down. Essentially, we're going to get a stablecoin bill this year, right? And then we're probably going to get a market structure bill at some point. And once we have those two things, it's going to like drastically clear up everything. So I'm really excited that we're going to get these things.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Here we go. I found it. Okay, so let me just run through this, because I thought it was a really interesting doc, because Paradigm does carry a lot of weight when
Credibility.
it comes to this, and credibility. And we'll just run through their term sheet, right? So we can go through these one by one. So crypto assets are native digital assets that are imbued with property rights, right? Number two
Scary
is
statement.
yeah,
Property rights.
property rights. Distributed ledger technology means a ledger shared across distributed nodes within a network synchronized between the nodes that is publicly accessible and is appended to via some kind of cryptographic consensus. It's pretty straightforward. Here's a good one. Smart contracts are computer code deployed to distributed DLT that execute instructions based on occurrence or non-occurrence of conditions.
You realize that's a key of this memorandum. These are discrete entities that have articles of inception, which are literally their code.
Yeah. And I think the next one is interesting, because like crypto assets are commodities, except for those that have forms of or aspects of a security, which are also in decentralized ledger. And this commodity part, I think, is the most interesting, because we did not see a lot of any CTFC action in the previous 4 years. We had the UkiDAO case, we had the Open case, and those two things were heavily partisan, arguably, extremely draconian, as coming down on both Open and also UkiDAO, especially Open.
Oh yeah,
UkiDAO got a short end of the stick. But one thing that I remember from the UkiDAO case that I wanted to bring up, because you are talking about partnerships, is that they were able to get a summary judgment against UkiDAO because nobody showed up in court. They claimed that they were a what's it called, unincorporated partnership, and that anybody who had ever voted with the token in governance was like legally liable at that point for anything that the UkiDAO had ever done.
Yep.
Yeah. And
relevant.
so like, how does that fit into your partnership? Because I know that's one of the things that we talked, like I've talked about at length with Alex Golubitsky, our former Squid legal person in residence, or Squid in residence. like, how would this type of partnership protect the members of the partnership from outside litigation?
Well, this is where immutability changes the equation. They probably took the position that persons not only in the DAO, but
Mhm.
they were looking at it from the perspective of centralized people in an office making choices and decisions, calling themselves a DAO. In the realm, especially, this is why I only posted the Curve Finance, and I haven't really thought about application to other voter escrow systems. Curve Finance contracts are immutable. It's a past
Right.
tense. These are established, deployed entities post fact. There's no person that is even capable of changing the code of these contracts. So that is very pertinent in the UkiDAO consideration.
Yeah.
Ongoing development of separate contracts. They are a partner themselves, maybe a recipient from the fee distributor contract. That is completely new work, and there's nothing that ties these contracts together to form an entity.
Yeah. I wonder if there's something that like specifically Open can go back and appeal in their case. Maybe I think they already accepted the enforcement action, so maybe there's not. But now that we have like rulings on the Uniswap contracts plus Tornado Cash, and essentially saying that immutable smart contracts are like excluded from the law, they're just code. Like you cannot like put them under ownership of anyone. And that's what number 6 gets into here, which is like a decentralized crypto asset exchange, which in this case would be Curve, is public and permissionless, right? And has no person or group of persons that can control, block, or approve the transactions on the exchange. And then that last one, non-custodial in nature. And like all of this, and I think yours goes in line with this as well too, is that this is going to push everything into the CTFC at some point. Like the DEXs just kind of get like pushed off into their own, like they exist. They're these partnerships, if you want to call it. I think it's probably like a really nice way of describing them as its own entity, like a general crypto partnership or something. But
Oh, you listen, there's laws for commodities and there's laws for securities, there's laws for property, there's laws for money. What's
mhm.
pertinent is the letter of the law. And it's not the case, what I describe in the memorandum is a partnership. Probably the most accurate takeaway is that the economic reality of what's going on means partnership laws are applicable. So there's a difference in statements there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the general consensus that we're going to get to in this cycle is that like DEXs or these VE partnerships, if they are non-custodial in nature, they should have their own exclusions that prevent them from having to be registered or like excluded from certain types of litigation or enforcement actions as well too.
They're going to have to reconcile. Okay, great. It's pretty ambiguous that this is a partnership that cannot file forms.
Mhm.
So reconcile that. That's not for the IRS to reconcile, it's for Congress to reconcile. It's like, what do? We need a definition of
Yeah.
behavior.
Right. I'm excited. We're gonna get so much like so many rules and laws coming out this year. That's just gonna juice it all up, and especially for a protocol like Curve or Uniswap or like any of the major dexes, is gonna have like extreme clarity to operate
Wow,
under U.S. law.
that's growth, and that's just certainly exciting from a technology standpoint, and certainly from an investing standpoint. And clearly, we could talk about the market collapsing today, but that's besides the point.
Yeah,
But
can I ask a question about one of your, you got a lot of bangers, and I'm surprised this one didn't take off. Everyone else is either like taking a wait and see attitude or panicking, and you're euphoric.
oh, completely euphoric right now. I've been waiting years for this to explain. There's 3 steps that lead to us experiencing what we know is inevitable. First is dollar down. Second is the bond market getting bid with treasury market, long end duration. And the third is the volatility of those treasuries collapsing. DXY down, 10-year plus yields down, move down. You get those three conditions, it's game on.
That's what Arthur Hayes argued as well, right?
We all argue the same thing. We all use different words, and everyone argues that everyone's saying something different. I say that literally, I say the same thing as Raul. I say the same thing as Arthur. I say we're all saying the same exact thing. Even Mike Howell, liquidity. Okay, so how do you get liquidity? Bond market volatility collapse. Move collapses, and there you go. The global Ave health factor goes through the roof. So that's a decent analogy, the global Ave health factor, which basically means you want your collateral to appreciate. And so here, 2 seconds. So let's say you got 10 grand worth of Ethereum on Aave, and it has infinite health factor. But then your 10 grand, and you don't want to take any debt, because Ethereum's going between 4,000 and 1,800 5 times a week. That's basically your move indicator through the roof. The volatility's through the roof, and you don't trust it. So what happens if your $10,000 becomes $30,000 and the volatility just basically sits there week over week after week for like 2 months straight? You're going to borrow some capital. So when you apply that to the global financial system, you're talking trillions of dollars.
Of new credit?
Credit, which is the dollar. The dollar is credit.
Which is the dollar,
It plays into basically what is the actual structure of a dollar, which is a conversation unto itself.
Yeah. What is the 10-year at today?
Probably close to 4 and change. Yesterday was getting close to 4. Well, holy shit. Wow, it broke 4.
Is it 3?
Yeah, 3.9.
No, it's a 3.8.
Wow. But look at the
Mission
dollar.
accomplished.
Partially, because look at the dollar. The volatility on the DXY is absolutely insane. I mean, it is historic volatility. Okay, this is it's constructive yet precarious territory from a DXY perspective. We did not breach the 50 SMA on the monthly, and we're not holding the 200 SMA on the weekly. This is the first breach. Yesterday was the first breach of the 200 SMA on the weekly in any meaningful way since June of 2020. Oh yeah. I mean, that's already done. The candle's already there. It's wicked. But that is the last time we were in a dollar position comparable to what we experienced yesterday. So there's your
Here's the
time.
monthly.
Yeah, I
Do a
got
5-year chart.
I got MAs up and whatnot, but yeah, it's the story of moving averages. A lot of folks don't like them. Levels they look at, and I agree. But a moving average is quite significant. It's because that's consensus.
Wait, so what's your like bellwether chart that you're going to be watching? The 10-year or
It's the trifecta. So obviously the dollar is a
dollar?
cross-currency pair. But how do you look at all charts at once? I don't have time. I got shit I got to do. So DXY, 10-year move. Those are the 3 charts, and I don't even have to look at Bitcoin. I could tell you what Bitcoin's doing based on those 3 charts.
So I actually haven't been looking at the charts at all. So I'm kind of curious to hear your guys' thoughts. I have seen some people mentioning that they've seen that crypto's been holding up relatively well compared to all the other assets. Is that true?
Oh yeah,
Like, is this like,
unambiguously.
so I mean, like I can't help but like be like vaguely like optimistic about everything that's happening, because like, you know, I'm so tuned out to market volatility at this point. But whenever I see like massive market volatility, I just assume there's a massive wealth transfer from someone to someone. And
Yeah.
it actually seems like if crypto is shaking out on top, then I'm on like potentially the receiving end of that. I'm the beneficial end of that, right? Like it seems like there's
Yeah,
a massive wealth transfer going on to like us in crypto, which is kind of cool.
As you're well aware, it's a very complicated story, which I handle on my stream. The hell's going on? But frankly, NASDAQ down 1,000 points and the DXY back up at 1028 is quite extraordinary to see. Right now, the dollar has got everyone shaken. The story isn't tariffs. The story is what tariffs do to cross-currency flows, the flow of capital between countries. And this plays into policy because of GDP requirements to service outstanding liabilities, debt servicing requirements. Frankly, the fact that the dollar is doing this and the move is back at 112, I'm surprised that Bitcoin is doing what it's doing. And that is basically how you started the thought. It is fantastic, astounding that it's at 83. We were just at the ETF and it was 47 and it crashed to 40. That's crazy that it's at 83.
I had come into like the past couple of years, watching a couple of really interesting market analysts that I like. And one of the things that they consistently said over and over and over was that the market valuations had never been higher. PEs had never been higher. The price that you were paying for like risk assets, especially like the S&P and NASDAQ and everything, had never been higher. Everything was just at like stock valuations were at like extreme levels. And maybe this is the reset, right? Where, in order to bring stocks and other things back into line, this is the sell-off that needs to happen.
Part of the equation, strong words, reset, overvalued. Look, NASDAQ and S&P, those are ETFs basically. 500 and whatever particular NASDAQ you're looking at. Maybe it's the 100 or whatever. But so they're irrelevant. You want signal through noise. You look at the Russell 2000 or the Wilshire 5000. So frankly, as much as we're seeing 1,000 points down on NASDAQ today following what the hell happened yesterday and the day before, the fact that the Russell 2000 is down 10 points, 5.25% following yesterday, we got some signal. Right now, there's capital outflow from the United States. And that is further supported by the dollar's move. Dollar goes down, it's going to force the unwinding of the Japanese carry trade. It's going to force capital outflows from the United States to outside of the United States. And that's consistent with the more traditional conversation about emerging market cycles, which we haven't had in a long time. And dare we look at the 6-month chart of the DXY, that presents my overarching thesis.
Yeah, I always go back to this chart, which is a inflation adjusted S&P 500 chart, and you see that like there are periods where we have sustained growth, but then there's also like decades where we have no growth at all, and potentially, we've been in one of those since like 2008. Like arguably that like we've been in a secular bear market during that entire time period. And maybe this is just one of the final or continuation of sell-offs, or one of the final sell-offs in order to clear out that bad hangover that we still have. Because I still think that like a lot of the issues that we're going through now are just like still knock-on effects from 2008.
Of course.
And we didn't solve anything back then, and we're paying the price for it now.
Well, we have to refinance $7 trillion this year. And
Yeah.
right now, Bessent's trying to get interest rates down so he could actually afford to refinance it. NASDAQ is just noise. It's overinflated, boomer meme coin. It's boomer meme coins. Same with the S&P, because it's an ETF means they could finagle the balance. And that's why we've talked about the Mag 7 for so long. So seeing NASDAQ down 1,000 points, S&P down almost 5%, 265, like, all right, whoopee-doo. Show me the Russell 2000. All right, there's your signal. Because that's the broad stock market. Or maybe at least look at what an RSP, equal weight S&P 500, equal weight, not just the shit that's gone up. And they've rebalanced to favor the stuff that's gone up. So their ETF goes up. These prices are all noise. Which is why really the dollar, the move, and the 10 years, the inspection and cross-border flows. The dollars have flowed into the United States over the last years. Just they've flown them in hand over fist, digitally, obviously. At some point, cycles will cycle. It's a fundamental characteristic of nature. At some point, the dollars need to flow out of the U.S. Dollar comes down is the foremost leading indicator of dollars flowing outside of the U.S. Now, what's fascinating is How does the dollar go down? It can't go down by itself. So what I'm curious, where I think about, and I don't draw a conclusion on, it's all speculative. How are they making the dollar go down? Can't go down by itself. There's too much debt out there. You know, China owes India, India owes China, India owes Russia, Russia owes India, India owes South America, India owes South Africa, India owes Australia, Australia owes India. But take that spider's web and make it the most complicated spider's web you could possibly imagine. And all of them owe each other dollars as interest on that debt. And there's this Brent Johnson territory. How do they get the dollars to pay the interest on their debt? And what happens when the dollar comes down? Then the whole equation changes, and that's why it becomes cheaper to get dollars. So all of a sudden their economies boom, and you get the emerging market cycle. Because capital flows from underperformance to outperformance. As foreign currency gets stronger, more purchasing power, prices go up. They get inflation. And equities go up. So if NASDAQ is down 1,000 points and some index in India is up 2,000%, you get your FOMO and you get your capital outflow. Because when you apply that type of story to the entire system, and that things don't happen quickly, they take periods of time. Capital flow into the United States, it'll flow back out over years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So if you look at the 6 month on the DXY, it screams 10, 15 years of lower high, lower low are really due for the dollar in order to bring the entire global system into equilibrium. It's a fun one on the 6 month. No psychopath looks at the 6 month on the DXY. Yep, I do.
You're talking about like the
6 month.
this one?
Yeah.
Oof.
That's what I'm talking about. 1970s. Okay. This is my broad thesis. Over the next 15 years, we hit that lower trend line. We are this is like Yellowstone. We are overdue for an eruption. We are overdue for a downward leg in the dollar. It has been a dollar bull market since 2008. All of the crypto bull markets that people refer to occurred in a dollar bull market. Dare we talk about what happens in a dollar bear market, which we've never experienced?
Yeah, I've never experienced it. What should I, as a casual crypto user, expect?
Well, generally speaking, to use hyperbole, that's by definition the super cycle, where the entire market produces higher lows and higher highs over the next 10 to 15 years. Albeit the scary or crazy thing is we've already been producing higher lows and higher highs. So we're talking about even higher lows and higher highs. Dollar down makes foreign currency more valuable. There's infinitely more foreign currency than dollars because they can print their foreign currency. So as the dollar gets weaker, they have more purchasing power. And by they, I mean the rest of the world, which means their number goes up. And then I remind folks that crypto is not a United States market. Crypto is an emerging market, as I define it, accessible to all markets of no market. It's not like New York Stock Exchange. It's in New York. You don't need an intermediary or a broker to engage with crypto, but you do, and you need dollars to engage with the New York stock market. You can engage directly with crypto from any denomination. You just need counterparties. And that's exactly what DeFi offers, the capacity for third parties to engage with one another vis-a-vis the contracts that we've talked about and that we know all too well.
All right. One last thing, then we get out of here, unless you have something else, Garrett.
No, I'm good. Been a fantastic conversation.
What about? I'm going to bring up the most hated chart in crypto. This one doesn't actually go on the 6 months. We'll do this one on the 1 year, or the 5 year for this one. But hated chart, just down only at this point.
Well,
Um,
my 2 cents is from my personal investing perspective, which I offer on my stream. It's irrelevant. It's noise. I don't treat Ethereum as an investment, nor do I treat Bitcoin as an investment. So if you have a portfolio, I bifurcate my portfolio between cash and investments. Consistent with Vanguard, my investments must produce cash flow. So cash isn't cash flow. Cash is cash, which means it's suitable for payment purposes. All right, fine. Bitcoin's more volatile than dollars, but folks forget that dollars are volatile. So stablecoins might be fixed at the unit of one, but as we look at the DXY, that value of one varies significantly over time. So the cash position of the portfolio is stablecoins and Bitcoin for myself. Everything else is investments that must have rule number 3. Fuck you, pay me. That's the core criteria for an investment in the captain's book. So I don't look at Ethereum as an investment. So what's the use of Ethereum? I need Ethereum to engage in transactions. I need it to pay for transactions. So my 2 cents is, what's the future of Ethereum? Fat protocol thesis. At some point, I expect these entities, quote unquote, businesses on Ethereum to be more valuable than Ethereum.
one last thing, and that's maybe you can talk about being a top 10 squid holder before we get out of here. It's not an investment. It's a holding position for the future of news and content distribution and everything else that Garrett has packed up in his big brain of his.
Oh, it's an honor. It's stunning. I love what you guys do. I have been with you guys since the first days, and it has been such an incredible journey. So I wouldn't put it in the cash position. So there's obviously an additional position that's collectibles, and that's a very popular position that people take part in. Clearly not an NFT, but the point is there's substance and meaning and sentiment associated with it, and that means something. It's not something I really entertain much from an NFT perspective, but it certainly is there. I know other folks talk about it all the time, like Raul talks about his NFTs and art, and then folks like that, other folks, DC Investor, he loves his NFTs. So that is just something I don't think about a lot, but it is important. Sentiment, what is meaningful? So Squid is meaningful in that regard.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's been really a blast having you around, and yeah, we've been at this. It's hard to believe, over 2 years now, and it's
Almost 3.
almost 3, and it's entirely like because of like part-time efforts, and we feel like we've never even really given it our full steam ahead go. But once we do, like, we think that we could get some pretty powerful stuff because we got amazing stuff. Just kind of like getting this loose confederation of random people who like are news junkies and follow crypto 24/7 together. So I'm excited to see where Squid goes this year. It's already we got some big plans. Let me just say.
My general expectation is the market, everyone is under appreciating where the markets are heading. And history, so like lendiness, the longer technology exists, the longer it's likely to exist. The longer a news source or an organization is in existence, the stronger it gets over time. You're some of the original guys that have discussed these topics. That is going to be extraordinarily interesting as this market heads to its destination.
So does that mean that I should buy stock in MSNBC and CNN? They've been around a lot longer than us.
Those are meme coins. I literally, in conclusion, Chase stock is a meme coin. You're not getting cash flow from mortgages. You're not getting cash flow from international investments. You're getting a dividend, which is a bunch of people sitting in a boardroom saying, "Here, peasant, shut up. Here's a couple of pennies on your stock." That's not an investment. That's a meme coin. I find maybe REITs and other stuff more aligned, but there's nothing like immutable smart contracts that are just programmatically designed to exist and distribute everything. Changes the equation. with nominee interest, of course.
Excellent. Yeah, everyone, if you're in that half that has not gotten a chance to read through the voter escrow partnership, highly recommended. It's it's a good long read, so it's perfect for a weekend. So given that we're coming up on the weekend, last full weekend, no, 2 weekends before tax day, so perfectly timely. All right, Sam, any final parting thoughts?
I just have one last tweet. This is my final tweet before we get out of here. Actually, this is hilarious. Absolutely. Here we have Paolo standing in front of the Wall Street
I
Bull.
saw this. I love this tweet. He's right. Public. It's already public. It already exists. Oh, this whole notion of I gotta fit in. I gotta fit myself into the mold of established frameworks and established systems. I love this tweet.
All right. I'll let you take it out, Garrett.
Just got nothing to say, but Squids, thanks for joining us. It's been fantastic getting to chat with you as always. It has been a live stream for Friday, April 4th, and we will see you all next tide.